This woman killed her own daughter, not for money, not for revenge, but for something far more twisted. She murdered the girl she raised, the child she gave birth to, so she could marry her daughter's husband. Take a moment to process that. A mother, ending her daughter's life, to steal her place in bed with the man her daughter loved. How does maternal instinct, the most powerful force in nature, transform into something so evil? Tonight, we're going into the darkest corner of human betrayal. A story so disturbing it will make you question everything you think you know about a mother's love. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Her name was Linda Catherine Morrison, and for 43 years, she played the role of loving mother perfectly. But as you'll discover, sometimes the people closest to us are the ones capable of the greatest evil. This is the story of how maternal love became obsession, how jealousy became murder, and how one family's perfect life became their worst nightmare. But to understand how a mother could kill her own child for love, we need to start at the beginning, when everything seemed normal. Springfield, Massachusetts. A quiet suburban neighborhood where nothing bad was supposed to happen. Tree-lined streets, white picket fences, and families who waved to each other every morning. This was home to the Morrison family, and from the outside, they looked perfect. Linda Morrison, 43, was known throughout the neighborhood as the devoted mother, always at PTA meetings, always volunteering, always smiling. Her daughter, Sarah Elizabeth Morrison, 24, had just married the love of her life 6 months earlier. Sarah was everything you'd want in a daughter. Kind, beautiful, with that infectious laugh that could light up any room. Then there was David Michael Chen, 26, Sarah's husband. He was an engineer at a local tech company, the kind of man who brought flowers home on random Tuesdays and remembered anniversaries. When Sarah introduced him to her mother 2 years ago, Linda had smiled and said, "He's perfect for you, honey." But as we'll discover, Linda meant something very different by those words. The wedding had been beautiful. Linda had walked Sarah down the aisle since her father had passed away years earlier, and everyone commented on how proud she looked. The mother-daughter dance was emotional, Linda whispering something in Sarah's ear that made her daughter tear up. Neighbors would later tell police they'd never seen a closer mother and daughter. Linda was at their house almost daily, helping with groceries, cooking dinner, giving marriage advice. "She just wanted to help," Sarah would tell her friends. "Mom's been alone since Dad died. I think she's living through my happiness." But some friends started noticing things, small things, the way Linda's eyes would linger on David just a little too long, how she'd find excuses to touch his arm during conversations, how she'd criticize Sarah's cooking, her cleaning, her appearance, but always with a sweet smile. "Sarah, honey, you might want to put on some makeup before David gets home," Linda would say, adjusting her own perfectly applied lipstick. "A man works hard all day. He deserves to come home to beauty." Sarah would laugh it off, but her friend Jessica Martinez noticed the comments were getting more frequent, more pointed. During family barbecues, Linda would position herself next to David, laughing at all his jokes, asking about his work with genuine interest that seemed excessive. But the most disturbing pattern was how Linda had started dressing. Gone were the conservative outfits of a suburban mom. Now she wore fitted dresses, younger styles, makeup applied with the precision of someone trying to compete. "She's just finding herself after being widowed," Sarah explained to concerned friends. "I'm happy she's taking care of herself again." What Sarah didn't know, what none of them could have imagined, was that Linda wasn't rediscovering herself. She was reinventing herself as a younger version of her own daughter. The house visits became daily, then twice daily. Linda had a key, of course, because family should always have access to family. She'd show up in the mornings after David left for work, critiquing how Sarah was managing her new home. She'd return in the evenings, sometimes staying for dinner, sometimes bringing dinner she'd made herself. "I just want to help you two get settled," she'd say, serving David his favorite meal. A meal she'd somehow learned to cook better than Sarah ever could. 3 months after the wedding, the comments started getting sharper. Linda began pointing out what she saw as Sarah's failures as a wife. "Honey, you're not ironing David's shirts correctly. Here, let me show you how a man likes his clothes cared for." Or, "Sarah, darling, you're letting yourself go a little. Marriage isn't an excuse to stop trying." These weren't just mother-daughter talks anymore. They were comparisons. And Linda was always the winner. She'd demonstrate how to fold David's clothes properly, how to season his food correctly, how to arrange the living room to make him more comfortable when he came home from work. David started noticing the tension. Sarah would be quiet after her mother's visits, withdrawn, questioning herself in ways she never had before. "Did I cook this right?" she'd ask him about a perfectly good dinner. "Do I look okay? Mom thinks I should wear more color." David would reassure her, but privately, he was starting to feel uncomfortable around Linda. The way she'd hug him just a little too tight, a little too long. How she'd somehow know his schedule better than Sarah did. How she'd show up when Sarah was at work, claiming she'd forgotten her daughter wasn't home. "Mrs. Morrison, you really don't need to come over when Sarah's not here," David told her one afternoon when she arrived with groceries. Linda's smile never wavered, but something flickered in her eyes. Something cold. "David, honey, I'm family. This is family taking care of family. Sarah would want me to make sure you're eating well." She'd already started unpacking groceries, making herself at home in his kitchen. Their kitchen. But somehow, when Linda was there, it felt like her space, not theirs. The most disturbing incident happened on a Thursday evening in November. Sarah had to work late, covering for a sick colleague. David came home to find Linda in their bedroom, organizing Sarah's closet. "Just helping her get more organized," Linda explained, but David noticed she was handling his clothes too, moving his things around. "She asked me to do this," Linda added, but something in her tone made David doubt it. When he asked Sarah about it later, she looked confused. "I never asked her to organize our bedroom. That's weird." But it was Jessica Martinez who first voiced what others were thinking. During a girls' night out, after Sarah had a few drinks and was feeling emotional about her mother's constant presence, Jessica leaned forward and said, "Sarah, honey, this isn't normal. Mothers don't act like this with their married daughters. It's like she's competing with you." Sarah's face changed. "That's ridiculous, Jess. She's my mom. She's just lonely." But the seed was planted. Sarah started paying closer attention to her mother's behavior, and what she saw made her stomach turn. Linda was flirting with her son-in-law, not subtly. She'd wear low-cut tops when she knew David would be home. She'd bend over in front of him unnecessarily. She'd ask him to help her with things that didn't require help. Reaching items on high shelves, moving furniture that wasn't heavy. And her compliments to David were becoming inappropriate. "You're such a handsome man, David. Sarah is so lucky. You're so strong. I can see why my daughter fell for you." Comments that made David shift uncomfortably and look around for Sarah to rescue him from the conversation. The breaking point came during Thanksgiving. Linda had insisted on cooking the entire meal at Sarah and David's house. "It's your first married Thanksgiving," she'd said. "Let me handle everything." But instead of including Sarah in the cooking, Linda took over completely. She served David first, made sure his plate was perfectly arranged, asked him about his preferences for everything. Sarah sat at her own dining room table feeling like a guest, watching her mother perform the role of hostess in her home. When David complimented the turkey, Linda glowed. "I'm so glad you like it. I've been perfecting this recipe for years." She looked at Sarah pointedly. "Maybe someday I'll teach you how to make it properly." That night, after Linda left, Sarah confronted David. Has my mom been inappropriate with you? David's relief was visible. I didn't want to say anything because she's your mom, but yeah, it's been making me really uncomfortable. Sarah felt like she was going to be sick. Her mother, the woman who'd raised her, who'd taught her about love and relationships, was trying to seduce her husband. But even then, Sarah couldn't imagine how far her mother was willing to go. She thought it was just inappropriate behavior born of loneliness and possibly some kind of midlife crisis. Sarah decided to have a direct conversation with her mother. She went to Linda's house the next day and sat her down. Mom, I need to talk to you about boundaries. David is my husband, and some of your behavior toward him has been making us both uncomfortable. Linda's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, hurt, anger, and then something Sarah had never seen before, something calculating. I don't know what you're talking about, Sarah. I've been nothing but helpful to you both. But her voice was different, colder. If you're feeling insecure about your marriage, that's your issue, not mine. The conversation escalated quickly. For the first time in her life, Sarah saw her mother's mask slip completely. You have no idea how good you have it, Sarah. You married a wonderful man and you don't even appreciate him. You don't take care of yourself. You don't take care of him the way he deserves. If I were 20 years younger. Linda stopped herself, but the implication hung in the air between them. Sarah stared at her mother, this woman she'd trusted and loved her entire life, and realized she was looking at a stranger who resented her own daughter's happiness. After that confrontation, Linda's behavior changed dramatically. No more daily visits, no more helpful gestures. But Sarah didn't feel relief. She felt afraid. The way her mother had looked at her during that conversation, the tone of her voice, the things she'd implied, it was like discovering your protector had always been your predator. Sarah started locking her doors, something she'd never done in this neighborhood. She stopped telling her mother about her schedule, about David's work trips, about their plans. But Linda seemed to know anyway. David noticed Linda driving past their house at odd hours. Not stopping, just watching. Should we call the police? He asked Sarah after the third time they'd spotted her car slowly cruising their street. But what would they say? My mother is driving on a public road. Sarah was torn between fear and the hope that her mother would come to her senses. Let me try talking to her again, Sarah decided. It would be the last decision she ever made. What Sarah didn't know was that her mother had already made a different decision. If Linda couldn't have David, no one could. And if Sarah was the obstacle between Linda and the life she wanted, then Sarah had to be removed. Linda's planning was meticulous. She'd spent weeks observing their routine, learning David's work schedule, understanding when Sarah would be most vulnerable. She knew about David's business trip to Chicago, knew he'd be gone for 3 days. She knew Sarah would be alone, probably missing her husband, probably emotional and vulnerable. Linda had always been good at manipulating Sarah's emotions, and she planned to use that skill one final time. The murder weapon was chosen carefully. Linda had access to Sarah's house, knew the layout, knew where everything was kept. She decided to use kitchen knife from Sarah's own kitchen, something that would make it look like a robbery gone wrong. She'd staged the scene to suggest an intruder, someone who'd broken in looking for valuables and panicked when Sarah came home unexpectedly. Linda had watched enough crime shows to know how these investigations worked. She had 3 days to plan, to prepare, to rehearse her alibi. But Linda's motive went beyond just wanting David. As she planned her daughter's murder, Linda created a fantasy about the aftermath. She'd be there to comfort David in his grief. She'd help him plan the funeral, help him deal with the police investigation, help him navigate his new life as a widower. She'd be indispensable to him in his pain, and gradually that comfort would turn into something more. Linda genuinely believed that after a respectful period of mourning, David would see her as his salvation. She'd be the one who helped him heal, who understood his loss because she'd lost Sarah too. In Linda's twisted mind, Murdering Sarah was an act of love. Love for David. Love for the life they could have together. The most chilling part of Linda's plan was how normal she acted in the weeks leading up to the murder. She went to work at her job at the insurance office, attended her book club, went to church on Sundays. She even sent Sarah a friendly text message 2 days before the murder. "Thinking of you while David's away. Call if you need anything. Love you." Sarah had actually felt relieved, thinking maybe her mother had realized how inappropriate her behavior had been and was ready to rebuild their relationship properly. Linda's final preparations were made on Tuesday, February 14th, Valentine's Day. She'd chosen this date deliberately. It seemed poetic to her that she'd claim David's love on the day dedicated to love itself. She drove to Sarah and David's neighborhood that afternoon, parking 3 streets away and walking through the wooded area behind their house to scout the best entry point. She decided to come through the back door using Sarah's spare key, the one hidden under the flower pot that Linda had suggested Sarah put there months earlier. For emergencies, Linda had said at the time, this qualified as an emergency in her mind, an emergency removal of the obstacle to her happiness. That evening, Linda called Sarah around 8 p.m. "Hi, honey, just checking on you. I know you miss David when he travels." Her voice was warm, motherly, completely normal. Sarah, who'd been feeling lonely and a little anxious about their recent conflict, was grateful for the call. They talked for 20 minutes about mundane things: Sarah's work, the weather, plans for the weekend when David returned. Linda was gathering intelligence: what time Sarah planned to go to bed, whether she'd taken anything to help her sleep, whether she'd been drinking wine to cope with missing her husband. After the call, Linda spent the evening in a strange state of calm. She took a long bath, did her hair and makeup carefully, chose an outfit that she thought David would find attractive when he saw her at Sarah's funeral. She practiced her expressions of grief in the mirror, rehearsed the words she'd say to the police, to David, to the neighbors. She went to bed early and slept peacefully, like someone who'd made peace with a difficult but necessary decision. Tomorrow, her new life would begin. Wednesday, February 15th, 2:30 a.m. Linda Morrison drove slowly through the empty streets toward her daughter's house, her hands steady on the steering wheel, her breathing calm and controlled. She'd parked 6 blocks away in the lot of a 24-hour diner, knowing the security cameras there would show her car, but couldn't capture the direction she walked afterward. She'd worn dark clothing, a hooded sweatshirt that would obscure her face, and shoes she planned to dispose of afterward. Everything had been thought through, planned, rehearsed. The neighborhood was silent, houses dark, no dog walkers or insomniacs to witness her approach. Linda had timed this carefully. Late enough that everyone would be asleep, early enough that she could be back in her own bed before dawn with a solid alibi. She'd left her cell phone at home, charging on her bedside table, creating the digital footprint of someone who'd never left the house. Linda moved through the shadows like someone who'd done this before. But this was her first murder, her only murder, the murder that would either give her everything she wanted or destroy her completely. The spare key was exactly where it was supposed to be, under the ceramic flower pot that Linda had given Sarah as a housewarming gift. As she inserted the key into the back door, Linda felt a moment of what might have been doubt, what might have been love, what might have been sanity trying to reassert itself. This was her daughter, her baby girl, the child she'd given birth to, raised, protected, loved, or thought she'd loved. But then Linda pictured David's face, imagined him holding her instead of Sarah, imagined the life they could build together, and her resolve hardened. This wasn't murder. This was clearing the path to love. The house was dark except for the nightlight in the hallway, the same nightlight Sarah had used since childhood, because she'd never quite gotten over her fear of complete darkness. Linda knew every step, every creak, every obstacle between the back door and Sarah's bedroom. She'd been in this house hundreds of times, knew it almost as well as her own. The kitchen knife she'd chosen was in the butcher block on the counter, a wedding gift from Linda herself, high-quality German steel that would do the job quickly and efficiently. Sarah was asleep in the bed she shared with David, but David's side was empty, the covers pulled up neat and untouched, because Sarah couldn't bear to mess up his side while he was away. She was wearing one of David's t-shirts, something Linda noticed and resented even in that moment. Even in sleep, Sarah was claiming ownership of the man Linda wanted. Sarah's breathing was deep and even, peaceful in the way of someone who trusted that her home was safe, that her mother's love would never turn into this. Linda stood at the foot of the bed for several minutes, watching her daughter sleep, the knife heavy in her hand. This was the moment when she could have stopped, could have come to her senses, could have chosen love over obsession. But Linda was no longer thinking like a mother. She was thinking like a rival, like a competitor who'd found the perfect moment to eliminate the competition. She moved around to the side of the bed, raised the knife above her head, and Sarah's eyes opened. For just a moment, mother and daughter looked at each other in the darkness. Sarah's eyes were confused, sleepy, not yet understanding what she was seeing. "Mom," she whispered, and Linda almost lost her nerve at the sound of that word, that complete trust still evident even in this moment of ultimate betrayal. But then Sarah's expression changed as her eyes focused on the knife, and Linda saw fear replace confusion. "Mom, what are you doing?" Sarah started to sit up, started to speak, started to scream, and Linda brought the knife down. The attack was brutal and efficient. Linda had planned for Sarah to die quickly, quietly, but fear and adrenaline made Sarah fight back, made her struggle, made her call out for help that would never come. The bedroom became a scene of horror. Blood splattered across the walls Sarah had painted yellow because it was cheerful, because it reminded her of sunshine. Linda's careful plan dissolved into desperate violence, and by the time it was over, both women were covered in blood, and Sarah's voice had been silenced forever. In the aftermath, Linda sat on the edge of the bed she'd just turned into a crime scene, looking at what she'd done. Her daughter, her beautiful daughter, lay motionless, and Linda felt nothing. No grief, no guilt, no horror at what she'd become. Instead, she felt relief. The obstacle was gone. David was free. Soon he'd be hers. Linda cleaned herself up in Sarah's bathroom, changed into clothes she'd brought in her bag, and began staging the scene to look like a burglary. She turned over drawers, scattered some jewelry, took a few items she could dispose of later. Then she let herself out the same back door she'd entered, walked back through the woods to her car, and drove home to wait for her new life to begin. David's flight landed at Boston Logan at 6:15 p.m. on February 15th, and his first call was to Sarah to let her know he was on his way home. The call went straight to voicemail. He tried twice more during the drive from the airport, assuming she might be in the shower or taking a nap. When he pulled into their driveway at 7:45 p.m. and saw that the house was dark, a cold feeling settled in his stomach. Sarah always left lights on when she was home alone, always made sure the house looked lived in and welcoming for his return. David found the back door unlocked, which immediately set off alarm bells. Sarah was careful about locks, especially when she was alone. "Sarah," he called as he stepped into the kitchen, and the silence that answered him was wrong in a way that made his skin crawl. The kitchen looked disturbed. Drawers partially open, items scattered on the counter. "Sarah," he called louder, running toward their bedroom, and what he found there would haunt him for the rest of his life. The 911 call came in at 8:02 p.m. David's voice was barely human, broken by shock and grief and disbelief. "My wife. Someone killed my wife. There's blood everywhere. Please, you have to help her." The dispatcher tried to keep him on the line, tried to get him to check for signs of life, but David couldn't touch her, couldn't bring himself to get close enough to that scene of violence. He stood in the hallway and wept while sirens grew louder in the distance. Detective Maria Rodriguez was the first investigator on scene, and what she found was a textbook burglary gone wrong, almost too textbook. The scattered jewelry, the overturned drawers, the missing electronics all pointed to an intruder looking for quick cash. But details bothered her. The back door showed no signs of forced entry. Sarah's car keys and purse were untouched on the kitchen counter, containing credit cards and $200 in cash that any burglar would have taken. Most disturbing, Sarah had defensive wounds on her hands and arms, suggesting she'd fought her attacker, but there was no evidence of a struggle anywhere except the bedroom itself. The investigation focused initially on David, as it always does when a spouse is murdered. His alibi was solid: plane tickets, hotel receipts, witnesses who'd seen him at his conference in Chicago. But Detective Rodriguez dug deeper, looking at recent changes in the couple's life, any signs of trouble, anyone who might have wanted to hurt Sarah. That's when Linda Morrison's name started coming up in witness interviews. Neighbors mentioned Linda's frequent visits, her odd behavior at community gatherings, the way she dressed now compared to how she dressed when her husband was alive. Sarah's friend Jessica Martinez told police about the conversation they'd had about Linda's inappropriate behavior toward David. David himself, still in shock and barely able to speak coherently, mentioned feeling uncomfortable around his mother-in-law and the confrontation Sarah had had with Linda about boundaries. Detective Rodriguez decided to interview Linda Morrison as a potential witness rather than a suspect, wanting to get her talking before she realized she might need a lawyer. Linda's performance was Oscar-worthy. The grieving mother, shocked by her daughter's death, devastated that anyone could do such a thing to her precious girl. She cried at all the right moments, said all the right things, expressed appropriate concern for David's well-being. But experienced investigators learn to watch for what people don't say as much as what they do, and Linda never once asked about the details of how Sarah died. The breakthrough came from Linda's cell phone records. While Linda had been smart enough to leave her phone at home during the murder, she'd been careless in the weeks leading up to it. The records showed extensive internet searches about home security systems, about how long DNA evidence remained detectable, about the typical time frames for criminal investigations. She'd also been researching grief counseling services and widow support groups, not for herself, but with keywords that suggested she was looking for resources to offer someone else. More damning was Linda's financial activity. 2 days after Sarah's murder, she'd made appointments for hair and nail salon services, had purchased new clothing, and had even looked into travel packages for 2 people to romantic destinations. Detective Rodriguez realized she was looking at someone who wasn't planning to grieve her daughter's death. She was planning to celebrate it. The physical evidence was circumstantial but compelling. Linda's fingerprints were throughout Sarah and David's house, but that was expected given her frequent visits. However, forensic analysis found something interesting. Linda's prints on the spare key under the flower pot were fresh, placed there sometime between the time David left for his trip and the time Sarah's body was discovered. Linda had handled that key recently, and there was no innocent explanation for why she'd need to use it while Sarah was home. The arrest came exactly 1 week after Sarah's murder. Linda was at her insurance office, talking to a co-worker about how worried she was about David's mental state, when Detective Rodriguez walked in. "Linda Morrison, you're under arrest for the murder of Sarah Elizabeth Chen." Linda's facade cracked for just a moment. A flash of rage, of being caught, of indignation that someone had figured out her perfect plan. Then the mask slipped back into place. "This is ridiculous," she said calmly. "I loved my daughter. I would never hurt Sarah." But as they led her away in handcuffs, Linda couldn't help herself. She looked back at her co-worker and said, "Please tell David I'm thinking of him during this difficult time. Tell him I'll be there for him when this misunderstanding gets cleared up." Even facing murder charges, even caught in her web of lies and evidence, Linda Morrison still believed she could have David Chen. Still believed that murdering her own daughter had been an act of love. The trial of Linda Morrison began 8 months after Sarah's murder, and the courthouse was packed every day with reporters, neighbors, and people who simply couldn't believe that a mother could kill her child for such a twisted reason. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Robert Hayes, laid out a case that was as compelling as it was horrifying. Linda Morrison had murdered her daughter Sarah in cold blood, not for money or revenge, but because she wanted to steal her daughter's life, her daughter's husband, her daughter's happiness. The evidence was overwhelming. Phone records showing Linda's obsessive research about crime scene investigation, financial records showing her preparation for a new romantic life, witness testimony about her inappropriate behavior toward her son-in-law. Most damning of all, David Chen's own testimony about Linda's behavior in the weeks after Sarah's murder. She came to the funeral in a black dress that was inappropriate, David testified, his voice breaking. It was too tight, too revealing for a funeral, and she kept putting her hand on my arm, telling me she'd take care of me now, that I didn't have to go through this alone. Linda's defense attorney tried to paint her as a grieving mother, whose behavior had been misinterpreted by people looking for someone to blame. He suggested that David himself might have been the real killer, that Linda was being framed by a man who'd gotten away with murder. But the jury saw through this desperate strategy. The evidence against Linda was too strong, too comprehensive, too clearly pointing to a woman who'd planned and executed her daughter's murder with calculated precision. The most chilling moment of the trial came when Linda took the stand in her own defense. Against her attorney's advice, she insisted on testifying, convinced she could charm the jury the way she'd charmed everyone else for years. But under cross-examination, the mask slipped completely. When District Attorney Hayes asked her if she understood that her daughter was dead, Linda replied, "Of course I understand. But Sarah was wasting her life. She didn't appreciate what she had. David deserved better than what she was giving him." The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge looked shocked. Hayes pressed further. "Mrs. Morrison, are you saying your daughter deserved to die?" Linda's response would be quoted in newspapers across the country. "I'm saying some people don't know how to be happy. Some people don't know how to love properly. Sarah was holding David back from the life he could have had." When Hayes asked, "With you?" Linda smiled. "I would have made him happy. I would have appreciated him the way Sarah never did." The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours, guilty of murder in the first degree, guilty of breaking and entering, guilty of evidence tampering. Linda showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, but spectators could see her scanning the courtroom, looking for David's face among the crowd. He wasn't there. He'd moved back to California the week after testifying, unable to bear being in the same state as the woman who'd murdered his wife to possess him. At sentencing, Linda was given the opportunity to make a statement. Again, against her attorney's advice, she chose to speak. She looked directly at the camera, knowing David might be watching somewhere, and said, "I'm sorry this happened the way it did. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. I just wanted us all to be happy." She paused and then added, "David, if you're watching this, I'm still here. I still care about you. This doesn't have to be the end of our story." Judge Patricia Williams sentenced Linda Morrison to life in prison without the possibility of parole. "Mrs. Morrison," the judge said, "you have shown no remorse for murdering your own daughter. You have shown no understanding of the gravity of your crime. You have expressed concern only for your own twisted desires. This court finds you to be a danger to society and sentences you to spend the rest of your natural life in prison, where you can no longer harm anyone else in pursuit of your selfish obsessions." Today, 5 years later, Linda Morrison sits in her cell at Massachusetts Correctional Institution, and according to prison officials, she spends her time writing letters. Letters to David Chen, who has never responded, who has changed his name and moved across the country to escape the nightmare Linda created. Letters to talk show producers, offering to tell her story. Letters to romance novels publishers, suggesting they'd be interested in her love story. Linda Morrison still doesn't understand that she didn't commit a crime of passion. She committed an act of pure evil. David Chen, now David Walsh, has remarried and has a daughter. He's never spoken publicly about the case since his testimony, but friends say he still struggles with guilt. Guilt that his mere existence somehow caused Sarah's death. Guilt that he didn't recognize the danger Linda posed. Guilt that he survived while the woman he loved was murdered. He's in therapy, working to understand that he was as much a victim of Linda's obsession as Sarah was, that her death was not his fault, that loving someone should never make you responsible for the evil that love might inspire in others. Sarah's friends have created a foundation in her memory, focused on domestic violence awareness and helping people recognize the warning signs of dangerous obsession. Because what Linda Morrison did, this isn't love. This isn't passion. This is what happens when someone decides that their desires matter more than another person's life, when someone decides that they have the right to take what they want, regardless of who gets hurt. So let me ask you, what would you have done if you were Sarah? If you noticed your mother acting inappropriately toward your spouse, would you have confronted her the way Sarah did? Would you have seen the danger signs? And what about David? Should he have been more forceful in rejecting Linda's advances? Should he have insisted on calling the police when she started driving past their house? Tell us in the comments. Because understanding how normal people can miss the signs of dangerous obsession might be the key to preventing another tragedy like this one. Because somewhere out there, right now, there's another Linda Morrison. Someone who thinks that love justifies murder, that desire justifies destruction, that their happiness is worth someone else's life. And the only way to stop them is to recognize them before it's too late. The next time someone's love feels like possession, the next time someone's care feels like control, the next time someone's protection feels like a trap, remember Sarah Chen. Remember that the most dangerous people are often the ones who claim to love us most. And remember that sometimes the greatest act of love is recognizing when someone else's version of love has turned into something deadly. Linda Morrison believed she was fighting for love, but real love doesn't require victims. Real love doesn't demand sacrifice from others, and real love never, ever involves murder.